do da da do da da do 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 da da dee boo dee do da do da boo do da dee boo doo. Hey friends, this is Christopher Davis-Shannon and welcome to the second installment of our series on how to improvise on ukulele. Now we're using the tune When the Saints Go Marching In as our vehicle to solo over top of, and last week we looked at the melody and how to improvise around the melody itself. So if you missed that lesson, please do click right here and go check that out because we're going to be building upon that this week. Now we're not always going to improvise around the melody. We can also use the chord changes themselves to find notes that will work. So let's take a look at that. Now the reality is, if you know the chords to a tune, you already know an entire grouping of notes that will sound good over top of those chords. And those are what are called chord tones. While we've played this C major chord since the first day we picked up our instrument, we might not have thought about, well, what are the individual notes that are actually contained in here, or the arpeggio, the broken chord. And what we have here, we have C, E, G, and we have a second C, an octave above this low C. So by using these notes, if we're playing over the change C major, they're going to sound good because they're contained in the chord. We don't have to worry about, will this work? So we can create a simple little idea simply using the chord tones and nothing else. So we have this C major chord for 6 measures up front. So here's just a little something we can do. And then we're up to our next chord. So what's our next chord? It's G7. What notes do we have in here? We have G, D, F, B, or if we put them in order on the staff, it would be G, B, D, F. But we can just use all of the chords, the notes already in this chord. We can just leave the chord shape down and play some ideas here. So maybe over top of that measure or two where we have G7, we can go something nice and simple. So here's maybe the first 8 measures of the tune, just a little bit. So we have nice and simple by just using the notes contained in the chord. Now you'll notice that I'm not always playing exactly where they are in the chord shape. Obviously we can play them in other places on the fingerboard. Instead of playing my high G, I played the 3rd fret of the E string there. Likewise on the C chord, instead of playing open strings, you can play the E on the 4th fret of your C string, or you can play the G on the 3rd fret of your E string as well. And I like closed notes when I'm doing individual note solos because I can slide and add a little bit more character to them, where an open string sounds how an open string sounds. So if we go past this, we go back to a C major chord, and then we finally have our last chord, an F, which contains A, C, F, and then another A, open A string, or a C up top on the 3rd fret. It doesn't matter which you use for this. So we have all of these notes that we can use, F, A, and C in order. So over top of the F major chord, we can just do something, simple like this. Just a little arpeggio like that. So let me play just a chorus of this tune, a few little solo ideas, just to give you an idea of what we can do. And it's not the most exciting thing in the world, but again, we're playing notes that we know are going to sound good and starting to kind of get an outline for a solo that we'll eventually put together over top of the chord changes, while making sure that we're cognizant of what the chord changes and the harmony is. So we do something like this. So now I'll play the chords, and why don't you try creating your own little map of a solo utilizing the chord tones. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if we take all of these notes that we just played, that we sourced from the chords themselves, and we put them in order, we would just have a big old C major scale. And as I mentioned last week, this song is diatonic. It's just in the key of C major. There's no notes that step outside of that. So we can just improvise over top of a C major scale and make that work. But I always stress keeping the chord changes first, because that's outlining the harmony of the song. And when I hear a solo, I'd love to be able to strip away the rest of the band and be able to get the harmony and the melody from what just the soloist themselves is playing. Or you're not really playing the tune necessarily, you're just playing notes over top. So when we look at this C major scale, we have all of these notes accessible to us. I'll link here to my lesson on the C major scale in case you're not familiar with it. Now for this week, we're not going to get too far into how to use all of these notes. We're going to look at that a bit more next week. But I want to give you an exercise to work with, and this is one of my favorite things to do, is to put on a drone, and I use a Cello Drone, which I'll link to in the description here so that you can use it, so that we can really hear how each of these notes interacts with the tonic or the key that we're in. So this is a drone in C, it's just the note C droning, and what we're going to do is play that C major scale over top of this drone and carefully listen to how each of these notes sound against that drone and the feeling that they give us, the color that it brings to the music itself. Because creating a solo isn't just about playing cool, fancy things. It's about creating a mood and creating tension and releasing that tension and telling a story. So we want to be aware of how each of the individual notes interacts with the tonic, the key center that we're in. So it sounds a little bit something like this. I'll just do whole notes on this. You C and D on the 2nd fret. Nice and tense. Open E. Sounds beautiful. It's a major 3rd. F on the 1st fret. G on the 3rd fret. Open A. B on the 2nd fret. And C on the 3rd. Back down to B. G, F, E, D, C. We don't need to really solo over top of this right now. We're going to talk more about that in a bit. But I want you to get your ears accustomed to what each of these notes sound like over top of the tonic, because being able to hear these colors is what's really important. So now let's try just using some of those notes in the C major scale and playing against the chord changes in the song we're working on. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. I hope you all have enjoyed this lesson. If you want to dive a little bit more into it, please join me over on Patreon. We have a worksheet to accompany this with all of the notes that we've talked about, as well as a lead sheet and a backing track for you to practice along with, because I think one of the most important things is just trying this as many times as you can and failing and recognizing what sounded good and what didn't sound good and going from there. Next week, we're going to be adding in more leading tones or notes within the scale or the chord that start to give us a sort of direction into the next chord and create more sense of motion in the melody as opposed to just playing individual notes that are contained in the chord. I'll see y'all next week.